Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jacob Zucker, a seasoned event management professional with over a decade of experience in orchestrating impactful corporate events. Jacob has a remarkable track record in leading large-scale initiatives, including managing Morgan Stanley's renowned summer internship program kickoff at iconic venues like the Intrepid Museum. His expertise spans strategic event planning, execution, and team leadership with the financial and corporate sectors. Jacob, it's a pleasure to welcome you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here.
Good. Could you share a little bit about your background and how you started in event management? Like what initially sparked your passion for it?
Yeah, certainly. So I think it all kind of started in college where, I became part of the social affairs committee for my school, and I just started planning projects and events for the student body. Obviously, I went to a very liberal arts college, and the connection of how to make this a career really wasn't in my forte at that point. So I was going to be a lawyer at first. And then after the 2008 crash, when a lot of those standardized professions kind of tanked, I kind of said, well, if these aren't really generating anything right now, why not have fun with what you're doing? And I kind of pivoted into the luxury hospitality lifestyle sector when I was 26 years old. That just kind of grew by itself, obviously with hard work, but also through networking and connections. And I kind of formulated this career on my own. I think working in the hospitality sector, especially in New York City, along with other major markets such as Miami, LA, Las Vegas, which were kind of now archaic in a way because we have all these other new cities that have emerged since that time period. But I think that experience really perfected my skills in this sector. And when COVID hit, I kind of had to take I feel like for a lot of us, we had to take a big step back about what that next step was. And then that rolled into Morgan Stanley, where I'm at today. And I'm currently one of the directors in event marketing for the firm. We started a new division after, I don't know if you heard, but we bought E-Trade 3 years ago. And that kind of created a new silo in the events department, where our division encompasses private wealth management, international wealth management, the firm programming, E-Trade, and U.S. banks. So it's been a very long and illustrious pathway, but I think it's the journey, right, that gets you here. And that's how I got into it.
Absolutely. So what was your initial experience in managing a significant event? And how did that early experience influence your current approach to event management?
Well, my first kind of interaction was with a B2C market, to be honest with you. The company I was working for was growing the B2B business at the time, but I think the foundational start was learning how ultra high net worth and high net worth clients, consumers work and think, and then what they're expecting out of an event or even an activation when they're either paying you for services, whether it be access points or you're adding it to an employee retention program. And I think that was a great start to really see then how that rolls into B2B events, right? Companies I worked with were HSBC, Goldman Sachs, even hospitality groups that we would do third-party events for, and really seeing how each audience differed. But at the same time, there was a cohesive understanding of what is expectations, what are people looking for these things, and also after 2008 too, what is the impact you're trying to have with the event that you're doing? Is it for branding purposes? Is it for awareness? Is it for client retention? And that was always part of our briefing process to make sure we knew what the end result was. And I think that experience really parlayed well into Morgan Stanley, right? This is obviously, I'll be honest, my first behemoth organization that I've worked for. So it's a completely different landscape and how they operate. As you can imagine, there's a lot of processes and a little bit of, quote, red tape to go through. But I think that foundation really set me up for success and being successful in this role that I'm in because of the high expectations the bank has, The clientele is very high, you could even say ultra high net worth for the events that we're doing for this audience. And even, again, the internal expectations, right? What the operating committee expects, what the board of directors expects, and even my supervisors who've been there for a number of years, and the level that they set the standard for.
So internal corporate events often serve as a pivotal moment for, say, new hires, interns, etc. So what, in your experience, makes these events different from external facing events? And how does this different impact the planning and execution?
Absolutely. I think, again, I keep referencing 2008 and the COVID pandemic because I think those were two big shifts in corporation outlook and spend, to be honest with you. So I think when you look at a whole year calendar these days, there's not a lot of, from my perspective, you don't really see a lot of branded main events anymore, besides, like, say you have your 2, 3, maybe even 4 flagship events a year, right? So for Morgan Stanley, summer intern, which was June 3rd this year, and our full-time orientation, which was the interns last year joining the firm fully as full-time employees this year, you see that the firm really places an emphasis on these because, one, it's first impression, it's attracting talent on the intern side, and then now you're moving into retention because now these are full-time employees, right? So how do you get people to stay? And you obviously can agree that we're in a market where people can just hop anytime, right? There's no loyalty is very tenuous now, and people, again, there's a lot of opportunities and people can get poached at any time. So what is really keeping people to stay? And then also, again, if you do the internship program, convert into saying, I want to accept an offer from Morgan Stanley, right? So a lot of the branded events come from either the human resources department or the marketing department, or, again, the operating committee board of directors, right? So these two events fall under human resources. They're flagship events that are planned every year. Space obviously changes, look and feel obviously changes every year. But this was our 3rd year using the Intrepid Museum, West Side Highway. As you can imagine, planning process started probably December, January for a June event. So literally half a year went into this to make sure the execution, the strategy, the branding that was being shown and emanated really was top notch. I don't know if you heard, we launched a new marketing campaign called Old School Grit, New World Ideas at the beginning of 2023. The firm spent a substantial amount of money on that campaign, which showed our brand research, because after the pandemic, the firm felt they needed a brand audit. And these were the words and the verbiage that came from this brand study of fusing the firm's old school grit, way of being in 89 years in business, and then new world ideas, our forward thinking, our innovation, how we're impacting the market. And a lot of that was shown to the summer intern class. To also highlight the competitiveness of the program, we were told that 140,000 applications were received for summer interns this year, with 1,400 offers and about 700 accepted who attended the event. So even getting in to that is selective, as you could see, and then showcasing the firm's presence and power in the industry through an event like that. And after the event's completed, you can imagine the feedback we're getting. The interns were writing me saying this was amazing. You could tell it was impactful. You could tell that they felt special also to be part of this. And, it's crazy because that was June 3rd. That's already now a month and a half ago. And the internship program ends in a matter of weeks already. So it's a pretty quick blip where you could have a lasting impression on especially a new Gen Z audience.
Mm-hmm. So you've touched on this a little bit on the summer internship program, and you said it is 700 U.S. interns.
This year it was. This year was 700. Yep.
I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about the strategic objectives behind that kind of event and how they're aligning with your talent acquisition and retention goals. Some key challenges you faced, how did your team overcome them? And are there specific tools or methodologies that you use to reinforce those objectives?
Well, the first challenge is the first week of June in itself. All the banks do their summer intern launches that week. So one is just space in general, right? what is the most impactful, what is the most memorable, and you got to be realizing, depending on your class size, what is the most convenient. How are you going to get 700 people to a spot, right? Or a plus, and how do you get them into the venue, right? Then also, I think when we pick the venue, it's just flow of the event, right? Some challenges we had in the past were, getting to minutia, food lines, transferring people to different spaces. We do the event in the main great hall of the ship, and then our receptions on the flight deck, right? So getting all those people up to the flight deck. I mean, I know I'm getting very granular here, but you think about these things in terms of flow, because if those things get clunky, that leaves an impact on the experience, right? How long did you wait for food? Was the temperature right on the flight deck? Because even though it's early June, sometimes we're battling heat, right? So were people comfortable? Were people enjoying it? Also, the food service, we had to get a tent for the roof to make sure food service could be served and everything like that. So, there were definitely a few challenges in the sense we had to look at. But in strategy, it's more just saying, the bank looking at what resonates with the firm, what also is also New York centric, right? We are a powerhouse. Our headquarters is in New York City. We were founded here, and what venues resonate with that kind of mantra and ethos that, again, kind of go back to old school grit, but then also new world thinking. And that's why it's something like the Intrepid is picked, because it's obviously a very cool space, but there's a lot of history behind it, right? And the museum's very interesting in itself. We offered tours of the museum to the interns, so they were even able to learn about the history of the ship and the context of the ship itself. And then I think I think the other big challenge too, especially at a place like this, is that there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? You have to please a lot of people. Everyone has a different thought, opinion, how things should go. And you as a planner and event professional, you really have to, monitor all of that and gauge who obviously takes preference and what takes priority, and really come to a kind of a cohesive decision that satisfies a lot of conflicting opinions.
So let's go into a little bit more about the engagement elements and building the experience around these kind of events. So, what makes an orientation event more memorable and impactful for interns and new hires beyond that sort of excitement about day one? And how do you and the team at Morgan Stanley approach sustaining engagement throughout that internship period? Because, very exciting first day, very intentional, but how are you maintaining that as you go forward for the entire internship?
No, absolutely. Again, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in that question right there. I'm working with firm branding and marketing as the department as a whole to talk about what messaging we're putting into the agenda, right? So, for example, with intern, we kicked off the day with our Chief Human Resources Officer, Mandel Crawley. He's a great presence, and he talks about culture and how to get your career started, et cetera. Obviously, now there's a big focus on DEI and culture, and I think the firm stresses that very well, especially to new joiners, and really talking about how that journey starts here, and also, though, reinforcing that this doesn't come easy. You still have to put in the work. You still have to be a hard worker and a team player, and really looking at the bigger picture. But however, the firm does stress a very personalized approach that you are the driver of your career. So that through the whole agenda is delivered in that messaging. Also, we like to showcase our new branding. So again, the campaigns that we were doing, the E-Trade ad that we debuted at Super Bowl, right, was shown. After some of the kind of panel sessions, we also had an exposition showcasing firm benefits, firm partners. We even had a media room that kind of went through trivia, like a fun trivia game that kind of walked through the firm's history and trivia questions, along with kind of branding and showing those ads again in that ancillary media room. And we had different sessions come in, and students were able to come in through different time slots, right? So that was a great way to kind of engage the history in a fun manner that wasn't, kind of, let's be real, hit the snooze and people fall asleep, right? So, and again, with Gen Z, you really have to attract their attention, right? With social media and all these programs that are on people's apps and phones. It's really trying to create that engaging, memorable experience where, again, if they get an offer at the end of the internship where they say without a question, I want to join this firm, right? But then if you move to full-time is a little different. They accepted the offer. They're now full-time employees, right? So the messaging is a little different than I would say intern. This year, we focused on some projects the firm was really successful at. So one thing we talked about was the Reddit IPO that the firm did, right? So they were showcasing a little bit more work product and work examples of the excellence that the firm delivers to its clients, and then showcasing like this is this type of stuff you could be working on as a full-time employee at Morgan Stanley. Plus, for that reception, I don't know if I said this, but the venue we chose for that was our Westchester office. We were thinking of doing it at a New York City venue that was stunning, but going quickly back to your question about challenges, a little bit there was budget, right? We really had to come down to saying, is this worth the money to have the New York City flashy venue, or is it worth showcasing a gorgeous renovated office that as an employee you could be interested in knowing about, and then you could also go and work out of, right? And then our reception was in the lawn that we had. And when we were able, we kind of curated the experience on the global offices that the firm had. So we had a pizza truck, we had a yakitori station, we had fish and chips, we had sushi. So every kind of food element represented the global presence that the firm had. And I think that was really a cool way to showcase the new employees that we have a global footprint and you could see our presence in different ways. And we did that through a very culinary and food and beverage way.
That's excellent. So, beyond that sort of initial feedback that you get from interns and from the production of the event, how are you and the team measuring the impact and effectiveness of these events beyond that, in a sort of longer term? Is there a particular metric that you're looking at? And I think the immediate knee jerk is probably, well, they took the offer and they accepted. So that's a definite impact. But are there sort of longer term metrics that you're looking at?
Well, I think what's interesting about these two events is that it's kind of like, well, if you don't show up for this, you're not starting off on a good foot, right? So it's like where our attendance rate isn't really a question, right? So if you're a summer intern and you're not there day one, it's kind of like, well, where are you at, right? So, and the same thing with full-time. This is their day one. They graduated college or whatever the point they're at in their career, and they're starting day one at the firm. So it's pretty much the attendance rate is not really an issue for us at these two events. I would say, one is the firm stresses hugely on surveys. Not saying we do that for these events specifically, because again, the audience is very vast. It's just more that the concept of a survey post-event is pushed out from most other activations, and we really look at those metrics and kind of feedback components in and planning the next year or the next event, or even is it a question, should we even do this again, right? But the impact on these two, I would say, to be honest, is direct. I would say since it's mostly internal stakeholders, it's just the feedback from those businesses. Obviously, Mandel Crawley's opinion matters to our head of talent, Susan Reed. We also work with a colleague, Martin Vergara, who's been there a number of years. All these people really chimed in saying these were very well done. And so that really impacts our department, along with, I did a little research with the interns and full-time employees myself. I found people that went, and I said, what did you think? What could have been made better? Because I think the other thing is, looking at successes is great, but also you want to be looking at how can you improve, what were things that we can make better. Again, and the bigger question is worth it. However, with these two events, they're going to happen regardless, right? They need to happen, right? So it's now a question of, do we do the Intrepid again? Did Westchester work? All those things come into nuanced play of whether you, again, use the same venue, whether you replicate the same formula and the agenda. And obviously every year the topics change depending on the market, the climate, and what the firm wants to really promote that year.
So, what are the common sort of pitfalls or mistakes you've observed in planning or executing internal corporate events and perhaps specifically orientations? And how do you think organizations can mitigate those risks and enhance the experience? I don't want you to pick on Morgan Stanley or anything like that, but if you're looking at the sort of broader industry, is there something that sort of comes out as, oh, people keep on making that same pitfall, and how do we fix that?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, it's just in this business, the more lead time, the better, right? We are living in a climate where things change even monthly, right? Look at 23. Last year, there were some events that were on the calendar in April, May, and then by the time we got to September, October, they were off the calendar, right? So having conversations early, and whether whether you're an internal planner or you're an external consultant or something, whatever you're doing with your client is really having that lead time, that conversation ahead of the game, so you can prevent those pitfalls. Because obviously we know things come up, last minute emergencies, things can happen at any second in events. But again, if you really give yourself that padding, you're mitigating anything that could really detrimentally happen substantially to the event, right? I think there's still things beyond our control. But I do say that in this business, budget is everything, right? What is the client willing to spend? And also, I still think to this day, the basic question of what is the objective, right? What is your overall goal for doing this? I felt like between 2010 and 2020, up to the pandemic, there was a lot of surges, obviously, with Instagram and the tech brands, such as Samsung, Google. They were trying to make this impact and mark on society with immersive experiences. And then you and I both know the word experiential got very buzzy and really immersing clients. But to this day, that's now the norm, right? That's no longer new now, right? So it's really now trying to implement technology in a way that, one, goes back to your previous question: what are the metrics of impact? What are the things that are really taking away from the event? But then turning that into an amazing experience, but then also realizing that tech can have some pitfalls that you also can hopefully preclude by having the lead time. But I think implementing some type of technology today in any event really makes it more impactful and memorable, especially if it's interactive. Like, again, going back to our trivia, we had an app where people were able to engage, right, and answer the questions and really make it more than just like saying you on a microphone. Who can guess the year, right? Like, so it's really creating that more touch point experience. But I think in this business, even with all the advancements, it's just sometimes it's still some of the old school stuff that you have to face, right? Because you're also dealing with people, and people are how they are, right? And people act how they want to act. And I think sometimes it's also weather. Like, a lot of this was date, right? Is it going to be too hot? Is it going to be too sweltering to have something outside? And then really wondering, and then having those kind of, I guess you could say, safety nets, right, in case it gets too inclement, etc. So either you still have the event, or you're able to cancel and have a rebooking date that protects you, and have that in the clause of your contract.
Absolutely. So, drawing from your experience, what advice would you have for other organizations looking to enhance their internal orientation events to better attract and onboard and retain talent?
I would say it's definitely a thorough analytical process, right? You first have to look at, because this is my first year doing these, right? And it was a very interesting, engaging process that I learned and taught myself, along with working with the other stakeholders involved in this, right? But I think the first thing is looking at what your current strategy is, right? Seeing where you can enhance that, and also where you falling the mark, right? We're also, in a competitor landscape. We always do thorough research on what our competitors are doing and how are we either making the mark or doing better, right? I think in terms of attracting talent, it's clear communication. When we had to do our emails for these events, everything was very straight language, very to the point, succinct. people, you and I both don't have time to like read essays anymore. And I think that is the first step, because that is your messaging to that audience. And then along with making them feel, again, very, very special, and also so like that, like they were handpicked in a way, because with these internship programs, whether you're at Goldman, UBS, us, Barclays, these are old cycles. These are old cyclical internship programs. So the applications are through the roof, right? So if they get selected, it's really highlighting you're talented, you're a smart person, you're here for a reason. And I noticed at the full-time orientation, our team really stressed that point, right? Really shed to them that if you're sitting here, you are, either quote a hard worker, very innovative, all those buzzwords and, very good adjectives describe why they're here today, because they're part of this program. I think obviously the other thing is also resources. Again, luckily at Morgan Stanley, we do have a lot of options in the sense of that, and not every organization has that. So I think it's also what can you use to your advantage, and what's your strong suit in your company to really highlight those differences that differentiate you from everyone else, right? And I think that's what really sets apart other events from others, right? But again, same time, since they are internal, those are usually the budgets that get cut first, right? So, because again, if it's usually a client event that's generating business, I've realized in the financial world, they would rather pay for that to get money than say, okay, we're making sure we're having an amazing, quote, internal event, right? So I think that's the other thing that a lot of sometimes internal teams face, because again, if it's revenue generating, that's going to take preface.
So as we wrap up, I always like to wrap up these episodes knowing that we have a lot of event professionals and organizers who are listening. I try to give them a practical step. So and something that they can practically do after listening to this episode. So what advice would you give to an event professional who's listened to this episode and is planning internal events and thinking, well, how do I push that envelope further? As you just mentioned, I think with every business, if it's a client-facing event where it's generating direct revenue, they'll see it as some value and can go further. But what advice would you give to an event professional who's in charge of the internal events and trying to leverage the same value out of their internal teams and those internal events?
Well, I think it's twofold, right? One, I would start with external research, right? First, what I would do is I would be looking for numbers to say, this is why these events are important, right? Showing how many, maybe finding numbers on like how many occur a year in a standardized way at a regular organization, right? Then saying, because of this, these amount of people join the firm, stayed at the firm, et cetera, looking at retention stats, looking at also hiring stats, right? Then I think I look at Morgan Stanley, anytime we want to, let's say we want to onboard a new vendor or even a supplier to quote, change things, you really need to show why is it worth their while. And I think it has to come back to what is the value this is bringing to whether the department and the organization as a whole. Not saying that's an easy process, right? That could take months, right, of due diligence and following up and making sure. One example I could say right now is like I'm trying to sign an agreement with a high-end hospitality group, which would be great, but this has taken months, right? It would be an MSA agreement that would impact the firm in a great way, but this has nothing to do with me, right? This is how the process is, and our legal team has to look at it, our firm-wide sourcing team has to look at it. So, but I'm still pushing after months to make sure that this goes through, and I think that also takes a tenacious attitude, right, of not giving up, because sometimes a lot of these things fall to the wayside, and it's nothing against you, but if you're really passionate to make sure that you want this to happen, you have to be the driver of that change, because no one else is going to advocate for that besides you, especially if, it's going to cost a substantial amount of money. The other side of it is showing if you could do it on a cost-saving way, then I would say it's a no-brainer. Because if you could really say we could do this through whether it be partnership, sponsorship, connections, network, and you could save value in that way, that I think it could be a more compelling case for whoever who's higher up to say, okay, we're going to do this. But my final point would be, you're the advocate for that, and you cannot give up on the program, because if you're not really endorsing it, it's never going to get done.
Absolutely. Well, Jacob, thank you very much for taking the time and jumping on the podcast with me. If anybody wants to reach out to you, is there a best way to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, just Jacob Zucker. And then my Instagram is at Jacob Zucker, Zucker. And those would be the best ways to find me. Excellent.
Thank you again for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.